But I would say if you're starting out in business, if you're doing, don't seek partners, because those two individuals could have gone into business without me, and they did. And so did they need me for the ride? Now I wrote the business plan, but so I'd say is like in any of this time, if you have partners, understand what value each partner brings to the business, especially starting out. And can you do it on your own? To have the faith in yourself. If you have the concept and you know this is going to work, it's just going to be hard work. Do it yourself. And if you do bring someone in, and if two partners, make sure you understand what each partner brings to that partnership.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. You ever need help with yours? Just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Gerald Finken. And Gerald, in high school, decided he wanted to be a pharmacist and did everything that he could to get into early admissions. Went to college, got a pharmacy degree, and then went to work in the pharmaceutical industry. I think also got a master's in systems analysis, and then came up with an idea to do an innovation, pitched it to the employer. They pursued it. They cut him out. So left corporate world after about 12 years and decided to do his own business, and created a on-demand labeling system and a couple other concepts to solve our varying problems. And some were successful and some were failures. And is now doing a startup that solves the issues of clinical trials. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Gerald.
Great. Thank you. Great to be here. Again, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Excited to have you on. So I just took a much longer journey and condensed it into the 45-second version of it. So why don't we rewind and unpack a little bit and tell us a little bit.
Do we need to talk anymore? We're done, right?
Sure, why not? We'll just do a 45-second recap of everybody's lives and call it good. But in the meantime, at least for this episode, why don't we go ahead and rewind and unpack a bit? So tell us a little bit about how your journey got started, why you're in high school and decided you want to be a pharmacist.
I love that one. It's called The Game of Life. You know the game, Milton Bradley, right? You spin the dial, and when if you rolled a 9, right, you became a doctor. And so my sister and I always played, my older sister, and so she said, you hit a 9, you have a higher chance of winning a game because your salary throughout the whole game was much higher. So in early on, we're not even teenagers yet, we were going to be doctors. The issue was I liked sports too much and the grades weren't all straight A. And so she went off to medical school, and yet I was still in high school, and she came back and I said, I'm not sure about this doctor thing. And so she came back one day and said, listen, you should be a pharmacist. You get to work with people, you're in healthcare, and you only have to hit B's, average your B's, and you get to be a professional. I said, count me in. So really, my junior year of high school is really when I got turned on to the practice of pharmacy. Because I remember when she said it, like, you want to be a pharmacist? I said, what's that? And of course, then followed it. And then, like I said, I got under early admissions and got accepted. So by November of my senior year, I was accepted to the College of Pharmacy in Rutgers, New Jersey.
So now you said, okay, it makes sense. So you basically say, I'm gonna take the game of life and apply it to real life, and I'll just follow that path. What could go wrong? And so you go out to pharmacy school, you get the degree, and then I think after you went to college and got the degree, you started working in the pharmaceutical industry. Is that right?
Yeah. I was very fortunate that when I graduated, I went right to work in the industry. So E.R. Squibb & Sons was the company, and it was right there in New Brunswick. So I didn't have to move, didn't have to do anything. So jobs are tough. This is 1982. So it was very difficult to get jobs in the industry. And so I was very fortunate. Out of my class, there was only a couple of us that got jobs in the industry. So I started my career there. And it was a great career starting there, because at the time, E.R. Squibb was a young company. They were just working on the ACE inhibitors and the low cholesterol lowering agents, and they were growing in leaps and bounds. And so there was a lot to learn as I was there in my first few years.
So now, how long were you at that position or at that job?
So I was at Bristol Myers. Well, then Bristol Myers bought Squibb. So I was there through that transition. So I was there for 12 years in total. And the whole time it was like I got into clinical supplies in the clinical research side of things, which is when my whole career has been in that. I just fell in love with it from day one. Everything from the manufacturing, packaging, labeling, and of course you deal with everything from regulatory, quality, manufacturing, all aspects. So it really was a very good career. But I can tell you during that time, and when I talk about like about what not to do, it was actually when I was at Squibb, I was there 5 years, is when two individuals approached me and said, listen, I think we could start this novel company doing packaging and labeling of clinical supplies all by itself. And I thought about it, and it was like, count me in. And so it was, it was very novel. No one else was doing it. And it's like, yes, I know this could work. It's just a lot of hard work and to make it go. And that's kind of like, again, condensed very quickly, is that did all the work, did a ton of work on the business plan. We got venture funded. I was like 27 years old and got venture funded for $1 million back in 1986, 87. But the issue is that the two partners went into business without me. And so I'm left with nothing. And but in hindsight, it's like, have patience, because everything really worked out for the better, I think. But there I stayed at Bristol Myers Squibb Bristol Myers Squibb at the time, then for I think it was like 7 more years, and really got to the point where I'd been done with the corporate life. When it got to a point of who you knew versus what you knew, it was time for me to move on.
So now I also remember, just to circle back a little bit, because I think you mentioned kind of during that you have the idea, you pitch it, get some funding, get cut out, but you also at one point I think you went back and got a master's degree as well. Was that after you left or during the same period, or walk us through that a bit?
That was all at the same time. It was crazy. Talk about like, so I was working full time at Bristol Myers Squibb, put in my 50 hours a week. That was about what I was doing. I was working part-time as a pharmacist, putting in like 20 hours a week, so Saturdays, Sundays. And of course I had to cut those hours back as we got a business plan going, because we were working, 20 hours, 25 hours. So I was getting very little sleep, running nonstop. I remember when we went to NEFA, it was Northeast Pennsylvania, and Fred Best was running that fund. I remember when he said we got funded, I was running 103 fever from stress. So trying to do it all. And like you said, I was going back for my master's. So I was going to night school, working part-time, working at Squibb, writing a business plan. But you never feel more alive. And really, like things I was learning in my master's degree program, specifically problem analysis, I was applying directly to the business plan. And so it was just meant to be that it was all happening. Now, granted, like I cut way back. I actually quit my part-time job because I just couldn't do it all. And then I took a semester off actually from school. But of course, when I got cut out, I went back to school, got my master's, and of course went back to working part-time.
No, makes sense. And so now you go back, you got a busy schedule, you're working in the pharmaceutical industry, you're getting the master's degree. I think eventually you decided to leave the pharmaceutical industry, and you started to pursue, creating some different businesses and systems and that on your own. Kind of walk us through, what was that transition? Was it just kind of one day you said, had it with corporate world, I'm going to go my own way and do my own thing? Or was it kind of a slow transition, or kind of how'd that go for you?
The last year I was at Bristol Myers Squibb wasn't going very well for me. I wanted out. So I was already looking for other positions. And I actually had a position lined up for Boehringer Mannheim at the time down in Virginia. But they weren't open their corporate offices yet. So like they were waiting. And in the meantime, my wife finished her degree and got a job as an art historian. And so that was in Moorhead, Minnesota. And so we looked and I said, I'm a pharmacist. And so I left I said, I'm done with the industry. And I left to become a pharmacist in Fargo, North Dakota, because Moorhead is right across the river from Fargo. And so just life happened. But when I got out here, I took the first 6 months off, get the family, but I missed what I was doing. And that's when I said I started a bunch of different things. I mostly consulting. I worked for a company here in Fargo called Prax that became the largest phase 1 unit in the world for doing, the generic drugs. And so learned a lot there. So it was really looking at those different opportunities that then where I started my company. Because I remember I was working for a company called Amblin Pharmaceuticals in San Diego. consulting, and they needed returns and reconciliation done. And so I went to the vice president, Carolyn Weiner was the name, vice president of manufacturing. Said, listen, I could do that back in Fargo for you. I was consultant. He said, well, give me a contract. So I put up a contract and I said, for $8,000 a month, I could do this for you. She said, do it. So for $8,000 contract in hand, and Mr. Visa started my company back in Fargo, North Dakota. So it was 700 square feet, and we called it the thin red line to separate like church and state. I had a piece of tape on the floor, that when we started. So you got to start somewhere. So that's how I started my first company. Was,
no, makes perfect sense. So now you start the first company, get the contract in place, and I think you mentioned over a course or a period of time, that you tried a few different businesses. Some were successes, some were failures. So kind of walk us through what was that progression of successes and failures that led to the current business.
Yeah. So in the end, the ship was going in the right direction the whole time. So my first company, I bootstrapped that and grew it for 20 years. And went private equity. We could talk about that in a minute, but it wasn't always. So like I was doing just returns and reconciliation at the time, which is a small piece of the whole clinical supplies operation. So I was following in the business that I wanted to do and got cut out of, but this time I was doing on my own with no VC money. And so like it was 6 months after I got that contract, there were some issues at Amlin and that contract came to a close. So right away now it's like, okay, no more income, or then maybe 9 months. So then it was a matter of like reshuffling and going full time in consulting, because I had some people working for me, and then finding other clients, to do the returns, and then just grew it backwards. So like to do good returns, you got to do better. You have to have the drug products to do the shipping, and so then I actually got into the shipping process, and then to do the shipping, you need the packaging and labeling, and so eventually I became a full service packaging and labeling service. But it was from building from backwards instead of like coming at VC money and building, like getting the blistering machine and going downstream. I swam upstream the whole time. But along that way, won contracts, lost contracts. It was always like trying different things to do it better. And that's really where like some of the innovation really started. There's two key things I started about 10 years into the company. And that was pharmacy counseling in clinical trials, which has never been done before. And I created this concept called on-demand packaging and labeling. And I won't get into the details, but the way we package and label clinical supplies, we haven't changed. Even now, like a lot of supplies, it hasn't changed in 40 years. And it's costly. It creates a lot of problems when you're trying to be innovative in the clinical space operation. So anyhow, I built these brand new, very innovative services. The pharmacy counseling services was far too early. So we were doing telepharmacy, telehealth, right? Decentralized, like the idea 20 years ago. Industry wasn't ready for it. So even though we grew it to $3.5 million business, I couldn't get the second client. Everybody looked at it as an added cost. And so I had to shut that down. And then we focused on this on-demand concept that I created that, again, really took a look at all the waste and some of it, like applying my master's by problem analysis, this like, what's the problem, the real problem? What are all the solutions? What's the best solution? And for me, the solution was bringing in the practice of pharmacy. Like, why package and label all the drug and put it in inventory when I could just package and label at the time I get a request to ship? And that in itself took me about 1.5 years to go through all the regulatory aspects, because the FDA, they're in the GMP, we had to keep it under GMP. But I eventually solved them all. So it was every step that we came across, every hurdle was never to me, it was never a wall I couldn't get over. I was going to go through it, around it, over it, but each step along the way until eventually we were able to provide this new package and labeling method. The lesson learned there, which became very successful, for 10 years, I tried to get the industry, like, come on, you got to do this. It's the best thing since sliced bread. It wasn't until I actually went to my competition and gave it to them. I actually told them how to do it, the management philosophy, how it worked, how to look at the GMP, that then it took off, because now, like a high tide floats all boats, right? And so when I gave it to my two major competitions, then it really took off. Until then, I was just some small company in Fargo, North Dakota with this crazy idea about how to package and label supplies.
Interesting.
So that's the journey in that company.
No, and I like that. And it's interesting, most of the time you're not going to go and approach your competitors and tell them how to do it better, because then you're going to lose your competitive edge. And yet you come to find out that, hey, if I don't go to them, I'm not going to be able to get the business, going, so to speak, or it's not going to be successful. So better to have a smaller piece of a bigger pie than try and keep the whole pie to yourself.
Exactly. It took me a while, and I was headstrong, young and headstrong, you know. But along the way, like one of the things about like being creative, I realized that the labeling systems that were used, there could be a benefit to this new system. So I actually put a patent out there for on-demand labeling. In other words, because it's a very costly, time-consuming under the original models. And that's, again, one of these mistakes I made. Like, I got the wrong patent lawyer. So make sure you get a great patent lawyer, because my patent lawyer got in an argument with, like, who's smarter with the patent attorney that was overseeing our case. And so for a year, we went sideways. So it was a great patent, but it was presented incorrectly. They presented too early, and then we couldn't backtrack. And so really, lessons learned is, and I don't mean just this like for you, but I'm telling you, like, if you have an idea for a patent, get a great patent attorney, because that concept, now everybody's using on-demand labeling, and that would have been mine.
No,
but
it's lesson learned, and it's
lessons learned.
Sometimes
Yes,
it's all in the timing, as well as or how you end up getting it set up. But nonetheless, you started that opportunity, ties raise all boats, and you expanded that out. Now I think the current business, or you shifted again or pivoted a bit to what you're doing with the current business. So walk us through kind of what was that progression, or kind of what was the transition, and what is the current business, and what are you doing?
So in my previous company, again, I brought private equity that went very, very well. Again, they brought in private equity. We went global, which then really took my company took off after that, and then got bought by a publicly traded company. But along the way, again, I never let go of that counseling and what we learned back in those, when we did telepharmacy 20 years ago. And I couldn't let that go. So I then, with my own monies, I did some proof of concept studies about what we could do for recruiting patients using pharmacies, because I love the practice of pharmacy. And like, one of the things I noticed is that in clinical research, pharmacists are not involved. There are pharmacists that work in the industry like me, but there's no practice of pharmacy in clinical research. And so I said, this has got to change. Now, this is like a change the world type idea, but why not, right? Why not? Got to start somewhere. So same thing, problem analysis. What's the first problem? What's the first hurdle? What's the first wall? And so we 2 years ago had the concept about bringing independent community pharmacists into clinical research. And I'm telling you, in 2 years, we're driving revenue. We have revenue from services from pharmacists delivering their services in clinical trials. So the idea was, we learned it back in my previous company about some of the packaging labeling, of course, packaging labeling, counseling of patients, recruitment of patients. This is all falls under the practice of pharmacy. So I've been an advocate saying, listen, pharmaceutical industry, you need a chief pharmacy officer in addition to the chief medical officer, because in the commercial world, it's a doctor, pharmacist, patient triad. There's not in clinical research. So I wanted to change that. I wanted to change it so that my profession had its role in clinical research, and embarked on it. And that's what I'm doing today. Very, very innovative, very creative. Now, luck would have it, sometimes, you're shined upon. COVID hit, and all of a sudden pharmacists became front and center. And with the studies that they were doing for the COVID, CVS, Walgreens, they used their databases, and all of a sudden now, right, they're getting into clinical research. So like, I didn't have to now give give myself away, right? Now my competitors did it for me. So when Walgreens said they're getting into clinical trials, bringing the practice pharmacy into clinical trials, everybody listens, instead of a small company out of Fargo saying, we're going to bring in the practice of pharmacy. So a huge hurdle got knocked over. That was a pretty big wall, got blown down by COVID and what pharmacists did in COVID.
No, it sounds like in a sense, the opportunity, COVID, I think that, what's interesting, whether it's COVID or anything else, is, when there's a change in the market, change in the industry, forces people to do something different than how they've previously been done it always presents opportunities, and those that can see those opportunities and take advantage, not take advantage in a bad way, but take advantage of the opportunity, are going to be the ones that can, or continue to build and grow their business. So it sounds like you're able to figure that out, and it was a good thing for the business. And so now, as we've kind of walked through the journey, and even caught up to where you're at today, great time to transition to the two questions I always like to ask at the end of each journey, or the present day of each journey, which is, first question I'd like to ask is, along your journey, What was the worst business decision you ever made? And what'd you learn from it?
So the number one thing I would say, go back to it, is I hired a CFO without due diligence. Met the guy on a plane. I liked him. I'm trusting. And in key positions, you can trust, but you've got to do the due diligence and to call references and to find out previous employers. It turned out he was a white collar con artist and almost took my company under. So I was like 10 years, my company was growing 10 years. We had grown to a bigger facility. We just put in our blistering line. I was really starting to see some profits, and he almost ruined us. And when I fired him, he actually forged documents that said he had ownership of the company. That's how bad it got. It was pretty awful. So the advice I would give anybody in key positions, do your homework. For me, like, take the time. It's tough sometimes, like, especially in the C-suite, especially in key positions. Do your work. Don't just take it for what you hear. So I survived it. Lesson learned. Make sure you do due diligence. I actually had an HR department soon after that.
No, I think that everybody, you hear those and like, I'd never made that mistake, and yet all too often you get excited about the opportunity. You think everybody's going to work as hard as I am. Everybody's entrepreneurial in spirit, and so it'll all work out. I'll be the exception to the rule. Then quickly you find out you're typically not the exception to the rule, and you get to learn some of those lessons the hard way. So it sounds like that was an easy mistake to make, but a great one to learn from.
Yeah.
Second question now that I always ask is, now if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Yeah, I like this one, and there's so much advice to give to people, but I always start because I hear it all the time, like, I'm going to go into business, and then so you talk to your friend, and like, we're going to go into this. So like, you get a group, and your group, so the idea must be good. And just because you have partners, like, it's going to work. It's like, no, if you can do it by yourself, do it by yourself. And then, more importantly, like the lesson I learned, we talked about, where my partners went into business without me. Now, again, I buried the hatchet long ago. Life worked out for me. I had no regrets. But at the time, we had talked about like putting documentation, even on back of the napkin contract, about who's going to be responsible for what and how does this going to unfold. And if I would have protected myself, things would have been a lot different. For that. Now, I'm blessed that it wasn't, because I like where I ended up. But I would say, if you're starting out in business, if you're doing, don't seek partners, because those two individuals could have gone into business without me, and they did. And so, did they need me for the ride? Now, I wrote the business plan, but so I'd say, is like, in any time, if you have partners, understand what value each partner brings to the business, especially starting out, and can you do it on your own? To have the faith in yourself. If you have the concept and this is going to work, it's just going to be hard work. Do it yourself. And if you do bring someone in, and if two partners, make sure you understand what each partner brings to that partnership.
No, I think that's a lot of great takeaways and a great piece of advice. And I like you kind of hit on there. Sometimes you think you need a partner, you should have a partner because it's what everybody does, or it's a conventional wisdom. And yet, as an example, for me personally, I found out I don't like partners. It's not that I can't get along with people, or, it's that I, just like having people that bounce ideas off, or mentors. It's just, I like the freedom of being able to make my own decisions, not having to run it by other people, not having to do it by committee, or have, be in or hold into someone else. And so it just works better for me and for my personality. But that also, it took me quite a good period of time to figure that out. So I like that piece of advice, because I think you have to be self-realistic on that.
Yeah.
So,
especially even in startup mode, right? Because decisions have to happen very, very quickly. You got to move, and you can't make decisions by committee. That's where, again, clarification, I think, is important.
No, I think that's absolutely right. So, well, now as we wrap up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Two methods to me personally: go through LinkedIn. I love that. It's just great, easy, and just look me up. I'm there. And the other one is, of course, the website. We have, just www.rxe2.com, and come to the website. That's for the business side of it.
Perfect. No, definitely encourage people to reach out to you, connect on LinkedIn, connect on the website, and support a great business. If nothing else, make a new best friend. So
Yeah.
with that, thank you again, Gerald, for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you, the listeners that are out there, if you have your own journey to share and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. Couple more things as listeners, make sure to click share, subscribe, leave us a review, helps us to reach even more startups and small businesses to help them along their journey to success. And on that note, if you ever need help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else with your startup, your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Thank you again, Gerald, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you.